is that many people assume migrants are stealing our jobs, migrants are stealing our housing and our health care, and they're using all our public services. Actually, if you have temporary status, you have very limited access to the same rights and benefits we have. But for those who are undocumented, they have no access. You don't have access to employment insurance. You don't have access to healthcare. You don't have access to social housing. You barely have access to your basic labor rights. You really are living in the shadows. And so these women are fighting just to have access to file a complaint at the labor standards, fighting to actually have the right just to access healthcare. And these are women who are fleeing violence or are victims of violence here.
Right now, there's a bill working its way through federal government. It's passed multiple House readings. Now it's passed some Senate readings. I'm talking about Bill C12. Opponents of the bill, like Harsha Walia, are calling it absolutely horrific. Some say the bill is set to completely bolster the power that Customs Border Security has here in Canada. And a lot of people are drawing comparisons to ICE down in the US. To learn more about the bill, how people are fighting it, I spoke to Mostafa Henaway of the Immigrant Workers Centre here in Montreal. Mostafa and the IWC do important work around protecting the rights of migrant workers as they are some of the most precarious. The bill is concerning. It's concerning to Mostafa and to a lot of the people that the IWC is helping. In this interview, you're about to learn just how bad things are and how much worse things could get under Bill C12. Here's the interview. Hello, everyone. It's Kalden Dhatsenpa. I am the host of Local 5 and 4. Today, joining me, Mostafa Henaway. How are you doing, Mostafa?
Good. How are you, Kalden?
Doing excellent. Doing excellent. There's quite a bit of news to cover. So for those who don't know, Mostafa is an organizer with the Immigrant Workers Centre, and I have you here today to help me and the viewers understand a bit about Bill C12 and just the general work that the IWC is doing. So, I guess for context for viewers, as I understand it, Bill C12 currently, on the shop floor, passing between Senate and the House of Commons. Initially, Bill C12 was the first bill by Carney under Bill C2, and back in June, I think, right after the Liberals formed government. It was quite controversial. Lots of people had questions, criticisms about how the bill kind of, I guess, expands police powers at the border. It gives authorities like the police, different jurisdictions of police, access to information. There's a lot of privacy concerns about it. And so tons of people kind of fought against the bill, and it was put back on the drawing board. And Bill C12 is now, I guess, the updated version we have of it that's been adjusted a little bit. Does that sound right?
Yeah, and a lot of the issues that were brought up initially by both the left and the right in terms of the privacy issues were taken out of Bill C12 or out of Bill C2 at that point, and now have come back in another separate bill that was just introduced by the current government in Bill C22. So they're constantly trying to ram some of these things in, but they're doing it through other new legislative projects.
Right. Different packages to get your privacy up on their tables. I guess, could you explain to me a bit why people initially fought against Bill C2 and are still fighting Bill C12?
So for a lot of people who don't know, Bill C12 is one of the most important pieces of legislation when it comes to immigration since World War II. And Bill C2 or C12, its reincarnation, was drafted and was put on the table. Canada's Strong Border Act, as a response to the ongoing trade war with Trump. Um, and so the idea was through the criminalization of immigration, through the ability to give the immigration minister kind of this discretionary power to cancel, modify anyone or group of people's immigration statuses, hasn't been a power utilized by an immigration minister since World War II, when, if people who don't remember, the none is too many policy. And the none of too many policy was something that was introduced to exclude Jewish refugees fleeing Nazi Germany, and also the internment camps for Japanese immigrants during World War II. And the other kind of powers that it gives is that it will also no longer allow anyone who's been in Canada for 1 year or longer as a temporary resident access to claim asylum. So let's put this real consideration on the table. You have many thousands of Iranian international students, per se, who are here as international students. They have temporary permits, and now there's a war in Iran. How can we deny them the right to claim asylum and say it's actually safe for you to go back to Iran? It would be ridiculous, right? So by the fact that they're limiting people's ability to claim asylum is a huge measure, because it undermines the basis of our refugee system, that it's not about a question of how long have you been here or how long you've not been here, but it's about the need to claim asylum, right? If you're facing persecution or violence back in your home country. And that doesn't come with a stopwatch or a calendar, right? And a lot of this was supposedly done to deal with quote unquote fraudulent international students, right? So what they're doing through Bill C12 is trying to play whack-a-mole. And the other issue is that with Bill C12, they're going to close the loopholes in the Safe Third Country Agreement. Before there were, after 14 days, if you had irregularly crossed from the United States into Canada, you could then at least claim for what's called the pre-removal risk assessment. It's not that you had the right to claim asylum, but you would have the right to apply, at least in the last-ditch effort, to say that you cannot return to your country of origin, and the U.S. is not a safe country. No longer do these loopholes apply. So it really is a re-engineering of the immigration system, one that I think even the Trump administration couldn't even imagine, right? And all of this is under the guise, and we were talking about this before the show, is sort of this, we need to give an additional 1,000, when we're talking about austerity, cuts to education, cuts to essential services, they're going to give money to hire 1,000 new Canada Border Services agents. So this is all in the name of fighting the war on drugs in terms of fentanyl and securing the border. And a lot of this is to appease the Americans, right? So when we think about all this elbows up that we hear, Bill C12 is actually to just appease the Americans in the hopes of a better position when they negotiate, particularly for the North American Free Trade Agreement, or CUMSA now, the Canada, US, Mexico agreement this year. So this is really about the trade war and who's paying the price. It's migrants who are going to pay the price. And obviously, yes, it is completely politically unpopular now, that migration has become, and migrants themselves have become a political football. We saw this with international students. We're seeing this with temporary foreign workers and international students, especially here in Quebec. And so what they're doing is what Mark Miller said, using our immigration law and system like a faucet. When it's not popular, you can kind of turn it off. When no one's watching, you turn it back on. And this is what's beginning to happen. right? And you see the faucet work at the Quebec level where the CAC is now in agreement with Canada, the federal immigration minister and the provincial immigration minister, where they're going to increase the numbers slowly of temporary foreign workers in Quebec again, right? Under this, we have too many immigrants and we have too many migrants, so they're taking our jobs. Actually, no, we need more, and we're going to bring them back in. And we're going to bring greater numbers. So Bill C12 takes away the entire legal framework and gives all of this discretionary power to the minister, ramps up a massive deportation machine, excludes people from the right to claim asylum under the guise of a trade war, right? And unfortunately, this is why it really needs to be opposed, because it's going to affect, over 2 million people who are here with temporary residency or precarious immigration status.
It's really interesting to hear about this, these kinds of developments happening here in Canada, right? Because it's like when you're looking at the bill, there's actually at one of the first readings of the bill in Parliament, the sponsor Gary, of course, his name Gary with the Liberals. There he is. There's a photo of him right here, as well as his name. It's interesting because at the first reading of the bill, I remember there's this, I'm reading through the sponsor who's kind of describing the bill and why it should exist, and there's some of the words chosen in there that I was really shocked to hear from someone who's supposedly a liberal, someone who's supposedly part of the elbows up team, right? Because they're kind of completely parroting the rhetoric of like, oh, this is about fentanyl, this is about criminals who abuse the immigration system. I'm kind of wondering. I'm curious what you think of those kinds of claims.
Well, in terms of the abuse of the immigration system, it's an outright, like, not just a lie, but it's just a parody, because many of the people came through the front door, right? You have this massive movement of international students in Ontario who, stated it's like, we're being denied status because we're being told that we came through the back door, when we actually know we came through the front door. We came through legitimate institutions. We have legitimate degrees. And now we're being told that we're fraudsters, and that in terms of criminality, you already have criminal inadmissibility in the immigration system, right? So people who do, I don't think that's a cause or should be, because that's a thing called double punishment. If people have already, served, let's say their debt to society, then they're being punished again through the immigration process. And so it's a rare, like, in terms of, the criminality that does exist is actually from the people who are profiting from people's vulnerabilities. It's actually the employers who are abusing a lot of migrants, who are dangling status or deportation in front of them. So paying them below the minimum wage, working them under the table, sexually exploiting them, charging them illegal recruitment fees upwards like $10,000, all because the system makes it so hard for people to stay. People become more and more desperate. So the criminals in the immigration system are the recruiters, the consultants, who've all profited from the complexity and the restrictive nature of our immigration system. That's where you see criminals, but that's never discussed. So even, let's say, around these recruitment agencies that bring over the temporary foreign workers, there's no legal mechanism to hold them to account. So in Canada, it's illegal to charge recruitment fees. This was something that was done since the beginning of time, since indentured labor, actually. And yet the employers can actually, or these recruitment agencies can charge thousands of dollars in illegal fees. And there's actually no mechanism in the immigration system or within Service Canada to hold them to account, to blacklist them, to charge them criminally. So the actual criminals are getting away scot-free, and the victims are the ones who are being told that they're the criminals.
Wow. It's kind of like it to me it pushes some of these people like migrants, refugees even more into this kind of world of precarity, right? And then it sounds like now because it's even more precarious now they're even more at risk, right? I'm kind of curious how you see this increasing precarity manifest itself in Montreal. Have you heard about some cases of people who are kind of in the margins in between these statuses?
Yeah, I mean, our work at the center of all the time. I mean, this is what we deal with every day. I mean, this is what we deal with, I would say almost 7 days a week. And we're seeing it more and more. So you're seeing people who were brought here under the temporary foreign worker program, meaning that they worked on a closed work permit for a single employer. And then, for many of them, they were not given the conditions of work that their contract had said. So now we're working with this group of truck drivers from the Philippines. This is one example. And these workers were being paid below what their contract had said. They were fired because they weren't doing the jobs that were on their contract, but the employer stopped them from doing those jobs. So now they're in a situation without any money to survive, without the ability to remain in Canada. They all paid upwards to $10,000 to this recruiter. And so now they're left in this situation where they're fighting just to be able to stay. They don't even have the money to go to the Service Canada office to file the complaints, right? So this is the situation that we put people in, as opposed to giving them open work permits or the ability to stay with permanent residence. Another case or group of individuals that we've been working with have been many asylum seekers, mostly coming from India, who are now facing deportation, right? And increasingly, this is becoming the norm. So, and we're seeing this deportation machine really ramp up.
Right.
So people are forced to either to go back to a country where they're unsafe, or to live without status, or to live with the fear of deportation. We have one of our longtime members, Ranjit Singh, who is a worker at Dollarama, was an active member of the IWC, who is a failed asylum seeker and is now facing deportation, is constantly living with this precarity of when is his deportation going to happen. He has a deportation date. We fight for a deferral. They give him a little deferral. And then we have to fight again to stop the deportation. So constantly in this battle to stop people's deportation, because CBSA is intent to make sure people are deported. I mean, we have another case where there's a deportation carrying out, and one of the reasons why you should be able to stay in this country is for medical reasons. The wife has breast cancer, still has treatment. The husband is actually had a heart attack recently, and they're set to deport them back to India.
Wow.
Right? When they have the right to stay. But I think what we're seeing without any of these legal changes is that the Canada Border Service Agency is feeling a little jealous of ICE down south. So we see this maximum effort to get as many deportations through the system. So you have the breaking up of families. You have people who, another case that we had to deal with was, where the children are Canadian. The father's been here quite a long time. Also, the wife is Canadian citizen, and he's the only able-bodied person in the family to take care of them. Both of his children have physical disabilities, also his wife, and they wanted to deport him regardless. And so we had to fight just to keep him in the country. So it's, and the problem is that CBSA has all of this discretionary power, right? And so it's making people much more precarious and more desperate. Another large case people might have seen in the news that we were very involved with was with a group of workers from New Rest. This is a major French multinational. They do all the food for airlines. And part part of the staff were unionized permanent residents and temporary foreign workers. But the half of the staff, half the employees were actually without any status, working under the table, in and out of the airport. They were promised that they were going to get contracts, and then they would be able to apply for work permits and be able to stay. But under the laws, a company can only hire a certain percentage of its workforce to get what they call labor market impact assessments, which then allow them to get a certain number of work permits, right? So before it was 30%, then went down to 10% with the restrictions under Mark Miller. Now in Quebec, it's going back to 15%. But many people don't know the law. So people, they promised me a work permit. They promised me a contract. They promised me a work permit. So, over 100 people were promised work permits where they were never going to happen. And the temp agency and the company told them, just work under the table for now. Don't worry. We're going to get you your papers. You're going to get your contract. And it never came. So, and so many people now are fighting just to stay in this country. I mean, and that's not even the worst. Like some of the groups of people that we work with, we work with a group of women who have no status, who've had deportation orders, and who live totally in the shadows. And this is one of the things about the anti-immigrant sentiment, is that many people assume that migrants are stealing our jobs, migrants are stealing our housing and our health care, and they're using all our public services. Actually, if you have temporary status, you have very limited access to the same rights and benefits we have. But for those who are undocumented, they have no access. You don't have access to employment insurance. You don't have access to health care. You don't have access to social housing. You barely have access to your basic labor rights. So you really are living in the shadows. And so these women are fighting just to have access to file a complaint at the Labor Standards Commission. They're fighting to actually have the right just to access health care. And these are women who are fleeing violence or are victims of violence here, not just in their countries of origin. And so, this is the kind of situation where we're constantly placing more and more workers. And then for employers, they're happy if they can get away with hiring en masse undocumented labor. A precarious workforce is a cheaper workforce.
You have more leverage over them.
Exactly.
They know they have less rights. If they become troublesome, you can just pull out, and then they can, then CB, Customs and Border Security can take care of them.
And also at the same time, it's politically not an issue, because you have to remember, non-citizens can't vote,
of course,
right?
Yeah.
So, and they just don't exist as numbers, because we don't track those numbers. So when people say, well, actually, we have a population decline, actually, you're just forcing a lot of people into precarity. These people are still here. We've just forced them to live without status.
I'm kind of curious. So before you talked a bit about how Canadian Customs and Border Security might be a little jealous of something like ICE, and I think there's something interesting there, right? Because to me, the whole thing about this stuff, about the Liberals kind of going elbows up and really trying to winning an election really off of their contrast to Trump, right? And it's really curious to see, that's how they market themselves. We're not Trump. We're like sensible, we love our neighbors, and we love immigrants, we love refugees, as the Liberals usually claim. But you see in the last few years this kind of shift back towards this kind of, maybe not back, but towards this kind of anti-immigrant sentiment. I'm kind of curious, so something that's important for viewers to kind of reflect on is like, it's like ICE was this institution it's pretty recent institution, right? But it was like slowly built up to the powers it has today. And sort of the reason it can enact the kind of violence it does today is because it was, over time given more and more and more and more unchecked powers. I'm kind of curious, do you have that kind of concern of seeing something with the power that ICE has in Canada with something like Bill C12?
Well, I mean, the power itself comes from the minister, right? the problem is that CBSA has a lot of discretion. Also, the fact is that for refused asylum seekers, they have a year. If they're refused, they have to wait a year for a pre-removal risk assessment, which would allow them to stay some more time. But CBSA agents can rush the deportation to get them out of the country before their next legal rights or the steps in their legal rights. So what you're having now is a rush to get as many people out as possible. So now in Canada, you have upwards to, on average, 400 deportations a week. So if you were the United States, time us by 10, that's 4,000 deportations a week. It's quite an impressive number. And a staggering number is that we're about to carry out the most deportations that we've had in over a decade. And so you're having this really, that's without the 1,000+ agents that they're going to hire. So you can only imagine how many more deportations are going to cut.
Right.
And one of the logics, this is the thing that's really gross, and I didn't get to this, was that one of the logics that around Bill C12 was the backlog, right? That we have to deal with this massive backlog. And you actually look at it on the immigration website. We have 2 million applications we're still processing because we have this multi-tier immigration system as opposed to simplified single-tier system. Is that we're just going to deport everybody and we're going to put more resources into deportation. If they hired 1,000 immigration agents to process the applications, then you wouldn't have a backlog.
Right.
So the backlog becomes the excuse to carry out deportations. And you're blaming the immigrants. They apply to you. You're criminalizing people for simply applying. Right? Well, we have to deal with the backlog by removing people, not by actually processing their applications.
Right. It's like because of the austerity created, they just don't have enough people to process these applications, and instead of investing in that area, you invest it in the punishment, in the more violent one of removing people from Canada.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I'm kind of curious. What are some ways that the IWC and other kind of migrant allies are working around trying to fight back against C12? Because it hasn't been passed yet. So far it's went through multiple readings at the House of Commons, through the Senate, where it received a bit of friction. I think you're telling me you're surprised at the friction it received, and now it's being sent back to the House of Commons. I'm curious what the work on the ground looks like again to fight it.
Well, I mean, each time I think the fight on the ground. So there's been multiple campaigns. So there's a common front against Bill C12, which included not just immigration rights groups, right? Also the coalition around drug policy in Canada. The civil liberties. Right. So you have a lot of different organizations playing a role. So there's, the Migrant Rights Network, which is a pan-Canadian migrant-led group that's been organizing constant responses to it, mass email blitzes and trying to put pressure on the federal government. You've also had what's called the Common Front Against Bill C12, which had over 200 organizations denounce Bill C12. And for us on the ground, what we're trying to do, because, the groups, there are lots of groups doing the lobbying and sort of the policy side, is that we kind of need to build an effective response similar to what's happening in the United States with the ICE raids, right? So you have these very locally community-led coalitions that are saying ICE out of our neighborhoods, ICE out of our schools, ICE out of our hospitals, right? ICE out of our neighborhoods. And so what we're trying to do is maybe not exactly like that, but we need a local response on the ground with migrants themselves, but also allies, like unions on the ground, local unions, to say no to Bill C12. We're going to continue to fight for regularization. We're going to build these coalitions that can respond to stop deportation. So we held a demonstration this last Saturday, endorsed by Conseil Central, the Metropolitan Montreal of CSN, different organizations like the housing committees like Cape and Park Extension. So the idea is really to mobilize a response on the ground. And also there's the Campaign Québécois pour la régularisation, which has all the different union centrales involved. And so the idea really is to build a broad response now to also about being organized of what's coming, but also to link it to migrants themselves and their realities, but also on the institutions that could put pressure on the government. Again, because what is our power here, right? And if the Liberals aren't interested in a moral argument, and I don't think they are under Carney, right? Because they're worried about getting the best deal out of the United States, right? Like that's the preoccupation of Carney. And it's not in opposition to the United States. It's not Davos. It's actually him just doing everything to squeeze the best possible terms in a new agreement with the United States, right? And so no moral argument is going to convince him. But, you know, do migrants and their allies and can we cut away the scapegoating, right? Can we work with local unions to say, no, these are our neighbors, these are our community members, and we're going to defend them exactly like what's happening in the United States, because the sentiment has actually changed, right? So the sentiment can change here. Maybe then we'll be able to apply enough pressure and migrants themselves to also leverage their power, right? In their workplaces and their communities. So, but, you know, we've been really focused on mobilizing on the ground to show the realities. So bringing out migrant truck drivers and healthcare workers and also people who are working at New Rest and warehouse workers to say that we're a central part of this economy. We don't have the capacity to shut it down, but we're going to mobilize in this way. And so the next step in our mobilizations is really going to be on May 1st. And that's going to be at Metro Park at 5 p.m. But it's really on the ground while supporting a lot of these larger policy initiatives. So, you know, like the Migrant Rights Network, the Common Front on Bill C12, as well as the Quebec Campaign pour la régularisation et justice migrant. So those are like the three bodies. And it kind of shows you the breadth of opposition to Bill C12, right? You know, you have all the four major unions, Amnesty, Ligue des Droits de Liberté, FFQ. So you have this massive civil society opposition. And I think we're beginning to see the cracks, right? You're seeing the cracks in the PEC, the program experience at Québécois that the CAC ended. And now the new, you know, sort of candidates to replace Legault are like, well, you know, I wouldn't have done that. And maybe I would change it again. So you're actually seeing a lot of the worst being sort of reneged because there's a renewed pressure and they don't want to look like Trump in the United States. It's not exactly like 2017. You have to remember when, you know, when Trudeau was in power and Trump 1 was around, there was really this stark difference and people really wanted to come out and, you know, refugees welcome and sanctuary city. We're not at that level. And I think that's a clear assessment. But we have to chip away at the anti-migrant sentiment and begin to show that actually the policies that they're trying to ram through aren't actually popular and aren't actually going to resolve anyone's crises, right? They're not going to resolve the housing crisis, right? They're not going to resolve the crisis around social services, especially when the government's proposing the largest austerity budget or had passed the largest austerity budget in a generation, right? I mean, over $80 billion is going to be cut from social services in order to fund the military, right? So again, you know, and then they're going to turn around and blame migrants. Well, I don't think anyone's going to believe that anymore.
Right. At this current rate.
No.
Where can people find out more about these campaigns?
You can go, I mean, obviously on our Facebook and Instagram and our website, www.iwc-cti.ca. And Instagram, you can look up Centre Travailleurs, Travailleuses Immigrants. And also for our Facebook as well. And you can plug away at those campaigns. You can also look at migrantrightsnetwork.ca. Also, again, for the broader, you know, to email your member of parliament or senator, as this is still going back to the Senate now again. to revoke Bill C12.
Mostafa Henaway, thank you very much for coming on to Local 514 to talk to me about this.
Kalden, thank you so much for having me.
That's our interview, folks. Hopefully you learn a bit about this terrible deportation machine that is about to be emboldened, perhaps. But you can do something about it. Write your MPs, write your representatives, make some noise. We don't want to just become a reflection of the U.S. And I think it's everyone's responsibility to fight that anti-immigrant sentiment. Love your neighbors. Take care of each other. Thank you very much, folks.